Hey everybody, Nick Espinosa, your chief security fanatic here. Don't forget to subscribe. And today, we're going to do a deep dive on essentially this. What happens when a platform, like a social media platform, simply cannot comply with laws? And so, by virtue of that, let's dive into the philosophy of impossible laws, which is a legal philosophy, and I'm not a lawyer, but we're going to discuss this. And I've got a lot of thoughts on this. I've been thinking about this for some time since a new age verification law came out in Mississippi, but Sarah Perez of TechCrunch really got me thinking about this today with her news that decentralized social network Mastodon says that it cannot basically comply with that new age law in Mississippi. This is the same law, for the record, that Blue Sky, the other social media platform, basically was forced to pull out of the state from and block their IP addresses because they had to. But Mastodon says they can't. So the social nonprofit, and for the record, Mastodon is a nonprofit, explained that Mastodon doesn't track its users, which basically makes it really difficult to enforce any kind of legislation that has age verification. Nor does it want to use IP address blocks because that would be unfair to people who are traveling, let's say through the state of Mississippi in this case, that are on the platform. So Mastodon founder Eugene Rochko said, quote, "There is nobody that can decide for the Fediverse to block Mississippi." And FYI, if you don't know what the Fediverse is, it's a decentralized network that includes Mastodon and other services and is powered by the ActivityPub protocol. So, in other words, you can set up your own social media platform right now, like Mastodon has, et cetera, et cetera. That's kind of the problem that we have here. It's totally decentralized. So, the nonprofit says that Mastodon is currently unable to provide, quote, direct or operational assistance, end quote, to the broader set of Mastodon server operators. Instead, it encourages owners of Mastodon servers and other Fediverse servers to basically make use of resources available online, and you're kind of on your own. So they also advise server admins to observe laws of the jurisdiction where they are located and operate. In other words, don't spin up a Mastodon server in Mississippi because, here we are, you're going to have trouble, right? So Mastodon notes that it's, quote, not tracking or able to comment on the policies and operations of individual servers that run Mastodon, end quote. Again, this is open platforms where you or I could go spin up essentially a server in Mastodon, host it, and allow people to connect and interact across the Fediverse, connecting my server to your server and everything else. It's decentralized. Quote, "One of the reasons Mastodon was founded was to allow different jurisdictions to have social media that is independent of the United States. People are free to choose to have their own account on on a Mastodon server whose policies meet their needs." In other words, you can find a server that is of your liking based on their rules, their terms of services, whatever it is. Again, it's decentralized. And so that was a good primer, and there's more to that story with Sarah Perez, but this has got me thinking, because I've been thinking about this ever since I heard about this age verification law coming out of Mississippi. And here's the thing, because decentralized platforms like Mastodon or PeerTube or just ActivityPub-based networks in general don't have really that central authority to enforce compliance, like I mentioned. Each instance, like I also mentioned, is operated by an independent admin. Oftentimes, these people have limited resources, meaning I'm doing this as a side project as I'm in college or I go to work, and so, here we are. There's no single switch that could block Mississippi IPs or force users through an age verification provider. In other words, Mastodon itself might block Mississippi, but if I'm running a Mastodon server, I might not. These are the issues that we have. Compliance would require thousands of individual operators to coordinate, which is essentially an impossibility, which really then brings us to the philosophy of impossible laws. And that's what we're talking about here. There's a long tradition in legal and political philosophy, for example, Fuller's Morality of Law, that argues if a law is literally impossible to follow, it undermines the legitimacy of the legal system itself. A law that cannot be complied with doesn't regulate behavior. Instead, it criminalizes existence. So in this case, the law is less about shaping user behavior, such as only adults can join, but it's more about shaping which platforms survive the framework of laws in the ecosystem, meaning Mississippi is essentially, by virtue of this, picking and choosing which social media platforms they'd like to have in their state. So in effect, it's this. For centralized platforms, the law is a burden, but it is achievable. But for decentralized platforms, the law is existential. You cannot legally operate here, full stop. Right? That's Mississippi's essential stance due to this law. And so this starts to look less like a safety regulation and more like a structural gatekeeping mechanism that favors large corporations with compliance departments. And again, if I'm that college kid that's running a Mastodon server, I don't have Facebook money, right? And so that's the thing. But on top of it, there's the problem with age verification itself philosophically, because age verification raises deep issues. The first one is identity versus privacy. So to verify age, you must disclose identity. And forcing identity disclosure on all users then undermines pseudonymity, whistleblowing, and privacy itself. On top of it, we have over-blocking and under-blocking. Technical measures are blunt. They risk excluding adults who refuse to hand over identification, while children can circumvent them using VPNs. Ask Australia how that went. Ask the UK how that went. These are the things we're talking about. And on top of it, there's the ethos of decentralization. The entire philosophy of the Fediverse is user empowerment, also data minimization, and the resistance to collect data centrally. Age verification laws are antithetical to that ethos. Essentially, the situation reveals a collision philosophically. Lawmakers view compliance as a technical mandate. Decentralized projects would view compliance to these laws as a betrayal for the very reason why they exist. So, what happens when compliance is structurally impossible? It really raises a question about the nature of governance here in this particular case, and also in general. Do laws need to acknowledge technological diversity, centralized versus decentralized? Should we think of decentralized platforms more like speech protocols, like email, for example, which governments can't easily regulate at a protocol level? You could email a child could email you, and you could say terrible things, or the child will say it right back. And if you've ever played Call of Duty at 2 a.m, you know they're saying it right back. So, is the goal of the law safety for minors, or is it, and I don't know if it's intentional or unintentional, is it to consolidate power and a handful of compliant centralized providers that will toe the government's line? And so, at the end of the day here, I think this basically ends up creating like a deeper ethical tension here, because at its core, it's simply this. The state's argument is we must protect children even if it means requiring strict compliance. And the counter argument that the Fediverse and decentralized platforms would have is protecting children cannot mean outlawing entire forms of human communication that are structurally unable to force compliance. So this is where philosophy meets policy. And so do we prioritize child safety through centralized enforcement, or do we prioritize freedom of speech and decentralized innovation, even if it comes with risks? I'll let you decide. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP, and Mastodon as well at NickAESP. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please attempt to stay private, informed, and secure. Take care.